Hello and welcome. Thank you for attending this second webinar in our Eat, Learn, Live, and Grow series, School Garden Success, Engaging Volunteers and Ideas for Fall Planting. I'm Larry Keys, the website monitor. This webinar is to support all of you in creating and growing more school gardens. Much of the content is included in the free garden guide published by Kids Gardening and Chartwells. My goal is to help bring that information to life and to help you, regardless of the space, climate, or resources that you have, to have a successful garden. So let me recap all that is available to you as part of the Eat, Learn, Live, and Grow School Garden program. We have a free toolkit. We have 6 garden webinars with Charlie Nardozzi as your resident expert. We have a Facebook forum for discussion, follow-up, and questions, and we have a garden grant opportunity. We'd like to briefly tell you about the 2 terrific partners who have come together to create the Eat, Learn, and Live, and Grow program. Chartwells K-12 serves breakfast and lunch to students in schools across the country and takes their role in educating kids and families about food very seriously. Our groups have teamed up in 2015 to bring the Chartwells culinary and nutrition expertise with the hands-on gardening and curriculum knowledge of Kids Gardening to create the Eat, Learn, Live, and School Garden program. One of the great things is that this program isn't just for Chartwell schools. It's for any school. It's more about gardens for all schools, which is why the Eat, Learn, Live School Garden Guide, Grant, and Webinar series is available to all schools across the country. Many of you may already know KidsGardening.org has been a leading resource for school and youth gardening since 1982, providing garden grants, research, and curriculum. Kids Gardening creates opportunities for kids to learn through the garden, engaging their natural curiosity and wonder by providing inspiration, know-how, networking opportunities, and additional educational resources. They provide free lesson plans, activities, grant opportunities, and curriculum. Our 6-part webinar series discusses various topics covering the fundamentals of launching and maintaining a school garden. We'll guide you through the toolkit and provide instructive and creative gardening tips, nutrition education materials, and guidance for building community garden support. As part of this program, we've created a Facebook forum specifically to allow you to ask questions and chat with the folks at Chartwells and Kids Gardening about any aspect of school gardening and about our grant programs. It's a great place to go for like-minded individuals to share ideas. Here's our Facebook forum address. We'd like to remind you about our Eat, Learn, Live, and Grow grant program, which is sponsored by Chartwells K-12. The grant offers fundings for schools seeking to enhance their curriculum and to offer food and nutrition education through an edible garden program. Any public or private school serving students in grades K through 12 and planning a new garden or expanding an established garden program is eligible to apply. And you'll note down below the URL for this. We'll also have this available in a number of other areas, including emails and so forth, so that you can get to the grant program. Note too that the deadline for this is August 31st. Here's a schedule for our webinar today. We're looking forward to hearing your questions. You can type those into the question box onto your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to as many questions as we can today. If we can't answer your question, we'll post it on the Eat, Learn, Live Facebook pages. And we'll also monitor the Facebook page for questions even during the webinar. Finally, if you have questions or technical problems receiving the webinar, feel free to call or email Amanda at the email address or phone number below. Charlie Nardozzi is a nationally recognized garden writer, speaker, radio, and television personality. He's worked for more than 25 years bringing expert gardening information to home gardeners. Charlie delights in making gardening information simple, easy, fun, and accessible to everyone. His energy, exuberance, and love of the natural world make him a popular public speaker and presenter. We're delighted to have Charlie with us today. And I'm now going to turn the webinar over to Charlie.
There we go.
There he is. Very good. Hi, Charlie. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Larry. Thank you very much
Excellent.
for that introduction. Let me just get my PowerPoint up here for everyone to see, and we'll turn that right on. And I think we'll be ready to go. Thank you very much,
perfect.
Larry. Yeah,
Looks perfect.
Great. So thank you all for coming to this second webinar that Kids Gardening and Chartwells has been putting on. This webinar, as Larry's mentioning, is all about the volunteer experience. And one of the key things with any school garden program is having the right people with you to help make that school garden experience a real fruitful one for the kids. And so we thought with this webinar, as schools are starting up again and kids are going back to school, that this would be a good time to talk about recruiting volunteers and, more importantly, retaining volunteers. How do you get them not only to come to a school garden activity or event, but to keep them there? So we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about the volunteer experience, but also I want to spend a little bit of time, since I am a gardener at heart, talking about fall gardening, which was one of the topics that will be on everyone's mind, especially in those places where they can do some fall gardening and get a nice crop in before winter sets in. So we'll be talking a little bit about that towards the end as well. So just as Larry was mentioning, I do a lot of activities in the gardening world, but I do have some specific experience with school and community gardens here in Vermont and regionally. And I'd like to pull some of those experiences to this webinar so that you can kind of get a sense of some of the things I'm talking about. But before we do that, what I'd like to do, which is what we did on the first webinar for those who are joining us, is do a little quick poll. This is a nice way for me to get a sense of who's out there and their experience with school gardening. So the first question we're going to ask you, which will pop up on your screen, you can answer it as quickly as you can, is what's your role in the school garden? What do you play? What do you do in that school garden? And if you could answer that, take just a second or so to pop in. You could see you could be an educator, volunteer, parent, a Chartwell school garden, or just other, which is a pretty broad category. And once we get a bunch of responses, we'll get the results for that poll, which will pop up fairly soon as well. This is really nice to kind of know for me because we're going to talk about volunteers in a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about how you can actually get these volunteers to be involved. And oh, there's the results already. Chartwell schools, 50% of you. Well, welcome to all those Chartwell school gardens out there, and a bunch of volunteers and some others in the other category. Thank you for filling that one out. And one other quick one I wanted to do is on where you're from. So we will just send up a little poll. What region are you from? And if you can, again, quickly do that. And this also will help me, especially when I start talking about fall gardening, as far as what to plant where and the timing of that. Certainly places like Texas and Florida and Arizona, they're really kind of gearing up, not yet, but actually fairly soon, for a big gardening season, whereas places like Minnesota and New York and Vermont are really looking to get something quick into the ground. So we'll get the results of that pretty quickly, and it looks like most of us are in the Midwest and Northeast, which is very nice, but a smattering of people out in the West Coast. So thank you very much for doing that. I really appreciate that. That kind of helps me guide my thinking about this discussion. And let me bring my slideshow back up for you. There we go. So the volunteer experience, let's talk about this. And so I'd like to bring this about, this whole idea of the volunteer, and really kind of talk about it in terms of your volunteer experience, because that's a great place to start. You know, a lot of times we have volunteered, whether it be at schools, nonprofit organizations, a variety of different places. And I'd like you to take just a minute to think about your own personal volunteer experience when you volunteered for another organization or a group, and a good experience, one that you remember is like, yeah, that worked out pretty well. You can jot it down, or you can just kind of think about it. I'm going to tell you one of mine. And one of mine has to do with a local food co-op that is in Burlington, Vermont. And I remember a number of years ago I was a member of it in such a way that you had to do some member hours to get the discount. So you would go there and they would give you, they would assign you things to do. And I just remember going to this co-op, and I walked in the door, and someone greeted me there. They were kind of ready for me. They talked to me about how long I was going to be there. And then we went out and we did a couple of tasks. And not only did they just assign me tasks to go do this, go do that, but they showed me how to do it. They actually stayed with me for a few minutes, said this is how we bag this, or this is how we stock that. And they set me off to do that once they were clear that I knew what I was doing. And then when I was done, they said, this is where you can find me for your next thing. And then we did that through the afternoon for a couple hours. And then at the end, of course, they were very appreciative and very thankful that I came and welcomed me back. So for me, that was a quintessential good experience. It had a lot of the different characteristics that we're going to talk about today in that experience. So it made me feel like I was welcome, and I really would like to go back and do this again. So think about that as far as a good experience, and then we can juxtaposition that onto one that might have been a bad experience, maybe not as pleasant an experience. And this one could be something that just didn't work. And the best way to tell a good and bad experience is when you're done with that experience, are you really interested in coming back again? And the one I'm going to bring up is actually one from a community garden I was involved in a number of years ago, and it was a work day at the community garden. And they had a work day where they were going to build some raised beds and build some compost piles. And so I showed up, and it was kind of unclear who was in charge. I had to ask around to find who it was that might be in charge, that I might have to find out what was going on. And then once I did find the right person, they kind of assigned me with some other people, which is great. You know, part of the reason for volunteering is to be social and work with other people, but there wasn't very clear instructions about what we were supposed to do. Go build a raised bed over there. And so we started looking around and finding some of the materials, but we didn't have the tools, so there was a lot of back and forth. I had to go back to the organizer, ask them, where is this? How does this work? How does that work? And of course, not only was that frustrating for the volunteers, it was frustrating for the organizer too, because they had to be pulled in a number of different directions. So by the time that the afternoon was done doing this experience, we did actually build something. It wasn't really exactly how they wanted it, which was another kind of negative thing. There was a feeling like we didn't really do the job that they were looking for. I walked away thinking, you know, I don't think I'm going to do this again. So it's good to think about these experiences for yourself, because that's what you want to remember as you're creating these volunteer experiences in your school gardens. We so often gear the volunteer experience based on what we need from the volunteer. What I would ask you to do is think about it in terms of what the volunteer can experience there that would make them not only come back, but maybe get more involved in what you're doing. So a lot of this information that I'm going to cover is in the Eat, Learn, Live Garden School Garden Guide, which is available not online, but you have to email Chartwells, and I put that email address right down at the bottom, chartwellsk12@compass-usa.com. Just email them, and you can get this very extensive guide talking about everything from gathering support, forming garden committees, identifying needs and resources, sustaining the program, all the things that we'll talk about as far as volunteers go. A lot of that information I'm going to mention here today will be in that guide that you can get and use in your school garden. And of course, this is going to be recorded, so you can always come back to this at a later date and look at this webinar and see some things you might have missed, or try to get clear about some of the things I was talking about. So talking about the volunteers, let's start with the garden committee. Now that's, if you're a school garden organizer or you work in school gardens, you know that you can't do it alone. So you often will have a committee made of administrators, teachers, people from the outside, master gardeners, a variety of different folks. So the garden committee is a real key resource for volunteers, because they often will have friends, family, and other people that they can reach out to. So they're your first group of volunteers, you might say, that you want to really foster and really have on board. When we talk about volunteers too, there's really two different types of volunteers. One is the volunteer that's going to be there for you day in and day out. So if they come maybe twice a week for when you have activities in the school garden, or they're there every Saturday, whatever it is, or in the summer, they're that kind of volunteer that's really going to be the consistent one, the one that's going to be there as a nice basis for your garden. The other type of garden volunteer will be one that kind of comes in for events. So maybe you have a building a raised bed day, like I was mentioning in that experience that I talked about, or maybe you have a certain harvest party day or certain planting day, some kind of special event. They'll come in, they'll do their thing, and a lot of times they'll have very specialized skills. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And they'll do their thing and they'll be done. And both volunteers are important, and both are equally important to your garden, but you have to have a little bit of each. And it's really key to know which ones you have and which people are filling which roles. So first of all, how do you find the volunteers? Well, I mentioned the garden committee. Word of mouth is probably the biggest way to find the volunteers. You know, talking to your committee, to talk to other people, to see who out there might be interested in working with you on this school garden. But you can also use social media. You can put up posters. You can spread the word in a lot of different ways through other organizations, through other committees like the PTOs. So there's a lot of ways to get the word out there, but that the garden is ready and it needs help. But one of the best things you can do to make sure your garden gets volunteers is have a really nice, successful garden. Because if you have a beautiful garden at the school, the parents come, administrators come, maintenance people come, everyone comes and they see it, they're going to be more likely to want to be part of something that's successful. So there's different types of volunteers. I was mentioning two general types, so let's talk about them more specifically. First of all, there are parents. These are probably going to be one of your key volunteers because their child is right there in the school. So they're probably very much invested in what's going on, what kind of experience their son or their daughter is having at that school. It's a great thing to have a core group of parents that will go right through the school years. So if you're in an elementary school, maybe they start at first and second grade, go right up through perhaps sixth grade. The one downside with parents is that they tend to follow their children. So you might have a nice core group, but you started when everyone was in first and second grade, and so it's easy to get a little complacent as a garden committee because you have 3 or 4 parents that are doing everything, coordinating everything. They're great advertisers of the program. They're helpers. They help in the summer. They do all that stuff. But by the time 6th, 7th, 8th grade, 6th or 7th grade comes along and their child graduates, moves on to another school, guess where the parents go? They go on to that school to volunteer there. So you can't be totally dependent just on parents, but they are a great cadre, a great group of people to have. The staff, when I talk about staff, it could be everything from assistant principals all the way down to the custodians and maintenance people. Yes, they are volunteers too. Now they're hired to be there at the school, but they're going to be doing a lot of little things for you, and you're probably going to be asking them favors about mowing or moving or cleaning or whatever it is. So it's nice to think of them as volunteers and to think about the experience they're getting. In fact, one of the best things you can do with those volunteers is to get to know them before you even start your school garden program. Maybe bring them some veggies from the summer or bake them a little something. Try to get them on your side so that they'll be more likely to help you out when you need some help around the garden. Neighbors, this is an interesting one to think about. I've been in school and community garden programs where they have neighbors around the school and the neighbors get involved. And some of them are actually school/community gardens, meaning that the neighbors have a garden on the school grounds as well. That's another model that's out there. The nice thing about that, of course, is that the neighbors are there all the time, especially in the summer when you're really looking for volunteers to help maintain things. And they can really get an investment in the garden, and not only are they taking care of their garden, that's part of the community garden there, they'll come over and perhaps take care of the school garden or help you out with the kids there. Garden clubs are a really nice, steadfast group of people. We have a garden here up in South Burlington, Vermont that is run, the children's garden is pretty much run by the Burlington Garden Club. And the ladies come once or twice a week, and they are consistent. Every week they're there, and they're doing the weeding, they're doing the watering, they do some educational things. So getting your garden, your school garden, adopted by a local garden club is one of their service activities. Is really a nice way to have a cadre of volunteers that'll be consistent. They won't be like the parents that'll come and go, or the staff that may not be there in the summer, or even neighbors who might have some turnover. Garden clubs tend to be pretty consistent, so they'll be there coming back time and time again. And Master Gardeners. Now this is a program, if you're not familiar with it, that's run through the land-grant universities in every state in the United States, and it's usually run through the Extension Service, and it's a program where people will sign up. They actually pay to take this course run by Extension professionals, and at the end of it they get a certificate saying they're a Master Gardener, but they also have to do volunteer hours in the community. Many of these hours can be in your school garden. If you can get a Master Gardener or two that's involved in your garden, that could be a great educational resource to help you with the classes that come out there, and they could be consistently coming back week after week to help you in the garden. And a lot of times, even after their volunteer hours are done, I've seen these volunteers stick with the garden because they get a personal investment in it. They get to know you, they get to know the school, they get to know the kids, they want to keep coming back. Other schools, another place to look for volunteers is in, especially if you're in an elementary school, middle and high schools. There are lots of models out there where high schoolers would come down and help mentor elementary school kids in the school garden. It's a win-win for both groups. So you get the modeling that the youngsters are doing with the older kids and seeing how they are moving in the world, and you get that mentoring that's happening with the older kids nurturing the younger kids. So thinking about schools that are in your district and maybe working together, that might be another way to get volunteers. And finally, service groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Rotary, Lions Clubs. There's a number of them out there that are always looking for different projects to be involved in. Even companies. Now, I know there's a lot of companies that have community service days. For example, up in the Burlington area, we were putting in a children's garden. There was a local branch of IBM that was here, and they had a community service day that we applied for. And what we ended up having them do, they came in, we bought all the materials for this project, and what the project was a tunnel. It was a metal tunnel that went up, maybe about 5-6 feet tall, and it went off in different splinters. And we brought all the materials. The IBM crew came in with their tool kits and their saws and everything, and in one day they constructed this whole tunnel system. They loved it. It was like one of those projects where you come in, you do your job, you get it all done. It's very satisfying. So if you have those kinds of projects, sometimes these service groups are great ones to have for those kind of programs. So let's talk about what volunteers want. So you've kind of got an idea of where you can get some volunteers, who the people might be, but let's think about it in terms of what the volunteers want, what they're looking for when they're coming to your site to volunteer. Because this is really important, because if they have a successful, positive experience, they're going to want to come back, and that's what we really want to have. So they want you to be prepared. There's nothing worse than like that situation I explained about the community garden, where you come there and it's really kind of disorganized. You're not sure who's in control, or who's in charge. There's not the tools you need. It's not sure what jobs you're supposed to be doing. Be ready for them. Know who's coming as much as you can, because always people are bowing in, bowing out. But as much as you can, know the people that are coming, know the projects that you're going to be doing, and knowing what tools they're going to need to be successful in doing those projects. And be prepared and organized. Know how much time your volunteers have. Some people may come in for an hour and that's it. Maybe some people will be there all afternoon. So have different tasks, different jobs that are out there that someone can come in, do their volunteer experience, and if they have to leave in an hour, they've successfully completed something. They feel good about it. So all of this is about you being prepared before the volunteers even step on your site. And there's lots of different ways to have different forms that you can use. These are sample forms that are in that school garden guide that I mentioned earlier that you can get through Chartwells. And these forms are really nice to have, and there's some examples of them. Volunteer descriptions, kind of like job descriptions. What they do is give you an idea of what jobs, what tasks need to be done in the garden, either for the workday, like the one on the right there is just a chore list for the workday, or the one on the left talks more about a volunteer task in general. So you'll have an idea of what kind of volunteers you're looking for, and then as people come to you, you can chat with them a little bit about what they're looking for and see if you can make a match. If you have this worksheet so you know what the tasks are, it's easier for those volunteers to match themselves to the task and have a successful experience with it. Also, they want to be welcomed in the garden. You want to make sure that when they're there, the first thing you should do is say, hello, hi, how are you? And make sure they're really feeling like they belong there and that they're really welcomed in the garden. And this is a place for them that you really appreciate having them there. You won't believe how important this is for a gardener to be really welcomed. And once they're there, you want to make sure they have good training and good education. Spend a little time doing an orientation. I know we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to just get to the task. We got this whole list of chores to do. We only got a morning on Saturday or some time to do it. But it does pay off to spend 5-10 minutes, whatever it is, to gather everybody together and do a little bit of an orientation. And the idea with the orientation is not only to go through the day and what's happening, but it gives people a chance to get to know each other. And especially if you have a little more time and you don't have as big a group of volunteers, you might even just let people introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their experience, why they're there, why they're interested, their connection with the school, whatever it is. It's the whole idea of creating a community. And when you create a community of volunteers, there's that feeling of, yeah, we're doing this together. This is not just my individual gardening experience. We're in this together. And so therefore, I'm going to be more accountable to all my other friends who are volunteers, be more likely to come back time and time again. So doing an orientation, kind of doing a little training about what the tasks might be, what the skills might be. Just going back to my experience in that food co-op, someone showed me how to do the tasks that I needed to do, whether it be how to cut the cheese and putting a certain amount in there and labeling it, whatever that task was at the food co-op. A similar type of thing should be happening when you have a work day or a volunteer day where you're asking people to do some kind of technical task. Have someone there to show them exactly what you mean when you talk about doing that task. And if you can't do all of this verbally, you can have signs. You know, some of the things you can do in a school garden is have signs that kind of show you some of the basic things that's going on in the garden. So, for example, with the water system that you might have, you know, maybe have a sign how to turn it on and off, come back, make sure everything is turned off before you leave, something about composting. You can even see this stoplight that's there, the red, yellow, and green one. That's one system that's used in gardens. I've seen it used in community and school gardens, which tells people what to do in a garden. And actually, you can have one that has, if it's a red light, that means you don't touch that garden or that bed because it's all done, it's all weeded, whatever it is. If it's a green light, that means that's the one you should be working on. If it's a yellow light, I guess you probably should ask somebody because I'm not sure what that would really mean. But what you can also do is make some fun with it. I had a group of gardeners that would have these plastic pink flamingos. And whenever there was a bed that needed to be weeded, they put a plastic pink flamingo in that bed, and that's the one you weeded. And you move the pink flamingo along the bed so that you know when you are done at that section, you leave it there, the next person comes in, picks up where that is, and moves the pink flamingo. So you can have fun with it. It doesn't have to be something that's altogether serious all the time. And also, you might have information about weeds or pests or how to harvest. You know, some of the things that you may not have time when you have a group of people together, a group of volunteers together, to go over everything. When I'm talking about that orientation and training, you don't want to have to make it so specific that it's going to be going on and on and on, and people are really going to get antsy. So a way to get around that is to have nice signage around. So it could be about common garden pests. It could be an alert, you know, look for the Colorado potato beetles, they're out now. It could be identifying weeds. So when you ask somebody to weed a bed, you can show them the weed there. They could see it on a placard so they can understand, oh yeah, this is a weed, this is something I should pull out. Or how to harvest. This is something, of course, we're all dealing with now in many parts of the country. Make sure people know when to harvest different things. I work on a lot of different garden programs, and that's often one I kind of forget about. I ask people, well, go harvest the beans and cucumbers and squash. And then they come back to me, it's like, well, is this big enough to harvest? Should I harvest it now? Should I wait later? So having some information about how to do that is going to make that volunteer experience much richer and much easier. What else are volunteers looking for? They want to do interesting work. Now, this is always kind of a hard one because there's always tasks in the garden that can be interesting, can be fun to do, and then there are those tasks that are just the grunt work. Yes, you have to do it. Turning compost piles, moving mulch piles, moving soil piles, digging out rows, mulching paths, and weeding, the things that are just kind of really the grunt work of the garden that really are important. You've got to have them, you've got to be doing them, but they may not be fun. So the way to get around that to make it a more positive volunteer experience is to group people together. So put 2 or 3 people together doing that kind of grunt work, and it's amazing because when you start moving a compost pile or moving a mulch pile, but you have some friends doing it too, you start chatting. You start talking about this and that and the garden and kids and whatever it is that's going on, and that work goes much faster. And so you've not only accomplished the work and made it a little more enjoyable, you've also accomplished another thing is they want to have a real social experience in the garden. They want to be socially connected. So by grouping people together to do tasks, even if it's a task that really one person can do, put a couple people on it. Let people get to know each other. Make it a social environment so like I was saying with the training, people really feel like they're a community here coming together to work on this school garden program. The more they feel like they're together and doing this, the more they're going to come back as a group and start creating friends. You know, a lot of times people will come to these volunteer days or be volunteers in a school garden program because they want to meet other people. They want to meet other gardeners. They want to have kind of a community and social experience. Remember that. Whenever you can, link people together. That being said, you'll ask people to do real grunt work things, but you also will ask people to do maybe more skilled things in the garden. And this is a great example that we took from a school community garden / in Vermont, where they wanted to do something about a bunch of pests in the garden, but they wanted to do it in a creative, educational way. So they brought in the woman there that's holding the pest in her palm of her hand up on the right, and she's an entomologist. She's an insect expert. And they brought her in, and then they brought a bunch of volunteers in, and they pitched this as an educational event, not just a, we're going to go pick bugs out of the garden, but an educational event. So she asked people to go through the different plants that are there, pick the bugs, bring them back to me, and let's talk about them. So she explained about the life cycle. She explained about the good bugs and the bad bugs, and the 99% that are just indifferent kind of bugs. And she told people how to take care of them and how to foster them or get rid of them. And a side benefit in the process, they picked a lot of bugs. They ended up cleaning up this garden of potato beetles and some cucumber beetles and cabbage worms just because people were going out and bringing them back and keep bringing them back. So if you have people have specific skills, they could be building skills, they could be educational skills, they could be cooking skills, they could be a lot of different skills. Try to use those skills in the garden and really make that volunteer feel like you're really feeling good about their skills and you really value those skills. And again, this goes back to those forms that we were talking about before, that if you have a volunteer fills out a form of what their skills are, what they're interested in, that's going to be a nice way for you to make these matches. And then you want to also figure out the level of commitment. Now, I talked about in the earlier about, is it an hour-long volunteer day or is 4 hours? But in general, talking to your volunteers and finding out how much time do they have for this. Let's be realistic. Do they just have a Saturday once in the summer? Are they someone who could come weekly to help out? Can they come for an hour? Can they come for 3 hours? Finding out how much time they have and how much commitment they have is a good way to kind of match them with an activity or a program or something that you're doing so that they have a successful, real positive experience. That's what you really want to have, that positive experience. Because once they've had it, they're going to get hungry for more. So if they say they've got 2 hours, maybe you just ask them to stay for an hour or so to do a certain thing and then say, well, we're done, but you're welcome to stay around a little bit longer if you like. And so you can kind of give them that option and they'll kind of pick up on it and you'll know their level of commitment so you don't overcommit someone. And you can find out your levels of commitment just by different tasks that are going on in the garden. And you can make it much more manageable. This is good for summer maintenance in the garden. Garden sign-ups. So for example, the top one there is a calendar where 2 people would have watering, weeding, and harvesting duties for the week. So you have 2 people that committed to that 1 week in the summer, and that's it. You can do this continuing into the fall too. If you need people to come in help out with kids, maybe they only have a week or 2, you can just assign people different weeks during the year so it doesn't feel so overwhelming to them. And this may sound like a bit of an odd thing to think about, but do they really want to work with kids? You're going to get some experience, some people coming in, they love the idea of school gardens, they love being out there helping the gardens thrive and the kids thrive, but they're really not that comfortable working with especially maybe younger children. So understand that. Understand what they really want to do and what they really want to get out of the garden. They might be someone who's more behind the scenes. They might be just people who do the work in the summer. Or they might be some of the people who do some of the other jobs that you need. Some of this seed stuffing, marketing, advertising, soliciting local companies, those kinds of things. Those are jobs that are just as important as the weeding or teaching kids in the garden. And you might need some of those people to do that. If you know that you have some folks who are more comfortable doing that behind the scenes than being up front, right, with the school and the class, that's a good group to have, and you want to match them with the right job. They want good communication too, and this is really important. So having signs up, just like this whiteboard, talking about what's going on, everything's watered, squash bugs are around, look for those. You can have suggestion boxes, like mailboxes, where people can put in ideas. You can solicit ideas. A lot of times volunteers love to have you solicit what you think they should do, because they have a lot of ideas too about what might work better than the system you have there. Be open to that. Be open to their ideas and what they think might be a good thing to go on in the garden, because that's going to have them more invested. You can do it the old-fashioned way with a mailbox, just putting suggestions in it, or of course you can do it on Facebook groups or through email or social media in various different ways. But make sure there's good communication going back and forth, that they're giving you ideas, you're asking them for things, and appreciating them all along the way. And that leads me to my next slide. Thanking people for their volunteers. Thank them all along the way. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here. Take a moment to thank them in the middle of a workday. They want to be appreciated. Some of the groups, like Master Gardeners and Garden Clubs, would love to have it in writing too. So at the end of the year, maybe send something out in writing to them, thanking their local garden club or master garden group for being involved in the garden. Maybe you have a little harvest supper for people who are involved in the garden. Any way to appreciate them is going to be really a great way to encourage them to come back. And finally, they want to celebrate. So I was talking about food. You can't go wrong with food. So having food in the garden, maybe in the summer, there's a lot of extra produce you might not be using, letting the volunteers take that home, having cooking going on so that they have some food too. Make sure it's a celebration. It's a joyful thing to be in the garden. Make sure everyone knows that and feels that, not just the kids, but all the volunteers too. So that hopefully gives you a rough idea of the volunteer experience, and thinking it in terms of what the volunteers are looking for will be a good way to not only get volunteers but to retain them. Again, I would refer you to that school garden guide that we have and that email address that was at the beginning of this slideshow that we will have there available for you to see again. And that will enable you to get all this information down in writing so you can review it at your own time. We only have a few more minutes, maybe about 5 minutes or so left, so let me talk a little bit about fall gardening. So this time of year, it can be a real good time to be thinking about planting things. Now, this is going to be have a lot of variability depending upon where you are in the country. Obviously, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Southern California are a different place in the garden than places like Minnesota and New York and Pennsylvania. So mostly I'm going to talk here about those groups that are probably in those zones 4 to 7 or so. That's kind of the main part of the country. And certainly some of this may be applicable for people further south as well. Just the timing might be a little bit different. So the first thing you want to think about is what to plant this time of year. So you're getting back in the garden. I know the last thing you're thinking about is I've got the classroom to get together. I got all these things to do. Thinking about planting more stuff in the garden that's already been going all summer, it seems a little daunting, but you can actually get a nice quick crop of some greens and some different crops if you plant soon. So greens, like I mentioned, are probably one of the best ones. Loose leaf lettuce, mustard greens, mesclun greens, kale greens, any of those. The beautiful thing about greens is that you can plant them and they come up in 20 days, 30 days, you can be just snipping off baby greens. Even if you never let them get to the full size, you'll get something from the garden. And kids, as you know, love it when they can actually be harvesting things and eating things from the garden. Radishes are a really nice one. You want to wait till it gets cool, depending upon where you are. If you're down further south in Missouri or Tennessee or places like that, probably still too warm to be planting things like radishes. But as you get closer to September, you can plant those in, a real quick crop. And some other roots like carrots and beets are really nice too. The nice thing I like about carrots and beets is that you can eat the bottoms and the tops. So even, again, if you don't get a full-size carrot or a full-size beet, you can get something that kids can eat and you can use as an educational tool in the classroom. Look for varieties that are quick maturing varieties for all of these, and for the carrots and beets, look for the baby version. So Little Fingers, for example, is a nice baby carrot. And there's some baby beets you can have too. Bull's Blood, I believe, is the one I was just thinking of. And then think not only of what you can get out of the garden this fall for a harvest, but think further advanced to what you can do for next spring and summer. Garlic and shallots can be planted. Usually you're going to be planting these more in October, November. That will be the time depending on where you are in the country. And then overwintering them and then harvesting them early in the summer. But it's a nice crop to put into the garden. You can harvest them as a mature plant, maybe in June or July, depending on where you are. But if you want to do it before the kids leave in the spring, you can harvest them actually as what they call wet garlic in England, meaning that they're still kind of like a leek. The garlic bulb isn't fully formed, but it still has that garlic flavor. And then overwintering greens, the same idea as with the garlic and shallots, but you're looking to plant things that you can overwinter in the garden. Plants like spinach would be the classic one to do this with, or even kale. So you plant it now, it gets up to a small size, then you protect it through the winter, through the cold. Next spring, March, April, whenever it starts warming up, you pull off the protection, it starts growing. Voila, you've got a nice spring crop before the kids leave that they started in the fall, so that same class is going to see the complete cycle of that green. When to plant is really variable depending upon where you are. So this is one I put up from Florida. And in Florida, you'll see that they have North, Central, and South Florida, different times. The best thing to do is think of where you are, what state you are in the country, and then Google the land-grant university, Purdue University, Cornell University, no matter what it is, where you are, invariably they're going to have a planting guide there for home gardeners. Look under home gardeners, look for planting guides, when to plant what, and they will tell you when to plant for spring and when to fall and do it in the fall. I could go on and on about different parts of the country and when to plant, but you'll see that depending upon where you are, you'll be planting somewhere between now up until October. What you plant when really depends on where you are, so use that as a resource. How to plant is pretty straightforward, just like in the spring. So you want to pull out some of those plants that maybe are just kind of going by now, the squashes, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, plants the beans that you don't need anymore. You pull those out, but then you want to amend the soil with compost. You want to create a raised bed if you didn't have one already in there. Pull out weeds, pull out rocks, really kind of create a bed that would be a great place for a plant to get started. And then you'll have to decide seeds versus transplants. So for seeds, the nice thing about them is that, of course, it's inexpensive. You can plant a lot of them, and they'll come up pretty quickly because the soil is pretty warm. The downside of seeds is that they can easily rot in the ground if it gets wet. They can be too dry if you don't water them enough so they don't germinate, and they're very susceptible to a lot of little creatures like slugs and different insects to eat them. Transplants are nice because they're big enough that you put a whole plant in the garden, but the downside of that is it might be hard to find transplants. What you can do with transplants, though, is if you're not thinking of planting your lettuce for another month or so, you can start them indoors. Start them with seed now, get a transplant that grows up so it's about 3 to 4 weeks old, then you can move it out in the garden. You can do this with lettuce, with kale, even with peas. You can do that. Put your peas out there. If you don't have a big enough season to get peas, to get the actual pea pods, you can eat the pea shoots just as well. And then fertilizing and watering, the thing to remember about these transplants is they're going to take longer to mature because the days are shorter. It doesn't really matter how hot it is. It's really about the day length. So if you see a packet of seeds and says you have 45 days to maturity, it's really going to be more like 60 days to maturity. So with that in mind, you want to push them along as fast as you can. Fertilizing with liquid organic fertilizers like seaweed mix or fish emulsion is a nice way to really push plants around, and of course keeping them well watered during dry spells, or if it get a lot of rain, make sure they're on a high raised bed so the water drains out well. Keeping pests away, like I mentioned, there's a lot of pests that are out there, and especially their populations have really built up by August, September, so you want to protect them, and a nice way to do that is with these floating row covers or these insect controls. These are nice because they let in light, they let in water, they let in air, but they'll keep the pests away from your plants. But you do have to be careful. You don't want to make sure you're not trapping pests inside of them because then it can be just a nice little smorgasbord in there for them. They'll just munch away. But this is a great one to use if you want to keep cabbage worms, for example, the white little cabbage butterfly that's flying around laying eggs on kale and cabbages and cauliflower and broccolis. If you want to keep them out of the garden without resorting to sprays, put these row covers over them. And the nice thing about these as well is that they're reusable. So you use them now, going into the season, and then you can use them again for a number of years. And you can have frost protection too. So if you are in a northern climate and you're worried that, well, I'd like to put lettuce in, or I'd like to put kale in, or carrots in, or some of these other things, but what happens if we get a frost in October or early November and it kills them before they actually reach any kind of maturity? The same material, I'll go back here to just show you, this same material, there's a version of it that's even thicker called a garden blanket. And this garden blanket is kind of like a thick, fleecy kind of material that'll protect your plants down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you have plants that are growing in there and they're moving along but you want to keep them as long as possible, maybe consider investing in some of these garden blankets. They just fall right over the plant. You can use metal hoops to keep them up. And what's nice about them is not only is it keeps it nice and warm in there, but it's also a level of protection from all kinds of critters, whether it be rabbits or insect pests that might be out there. And you can extend your garden season for maybe another couple of weeks, maybe even as long as a month. So as you have plants in there and you're looking what to do in the garden in November, December, if you've got plants that are still alive and you can go out and harvest them, it's even better because the kids will get so excited, especially when you're around the holidays, that they can pick red radishes and beets and carrots and lettuces for Thanksgiving, for example. And then finally, thinking again in terms of the garlic and shallots and overwintering plants, greens like spinach, think about that. Think about ways that you might want to plant something, get it up to a certain degree of maturity and protect it, or like garlic and shallots, plant it and then mulch over it all winter long. So that will be a bed that will come back again in early spring, so you'll have something there that will be popping up in the garden, a great educational opportunity to work with kids and work with the cafeteria too, because you'll have some things to share with them. So think about it not in terms just of the fall, winter, but in the spring as well. So the whole idea with having volunteers and having fall planting is to have happy kids and happy volunteers. If everyone is working together, you've got a plan for your fall garden, you've got volunteers that are feeling appreciated and wanted to come back and doing jobs that they really feel like they're contributing to, you're going to have volunteers that will be coming back time and time again. And your job as a school garden educator and a teacher or a parent or anyone who's in that garden committee is to make sure you're matching the right experiences with the right kids. All of this is going to really manifest into a much more successful school garden. So I would love to take some questions as you're hopefully been writing down some ideas as we've been going along. And I think Larry will probably be coming back, as well as Sarah, our educational specialist for KidsGardening.org. And if you have any questions about volunteers, maybe some situations or scenarios that you had that maybe didn't work so well or worked really well and you wanted to share those with us, all of those are really nice scenarios that we would love to have you contributing to.
Okay, so we've got questions. I also want to mention that Sarah Pounders, our Kids Gardening Grants Education Specialist, will join us in answering your questions. Since 2005, Sarah's worked as an education specialist at KidsGardening.org, coordinating numerous children's gardens, writing curricula and activities for youth of all ages, teaching formal and informal youth education programs, and conducting teacher training sessions on integrating gardens into the classroom. Sarah also enjoys gardening at home with her 2 young children and serves as the volunteer garden coordinator at her daughter's elementary school. So I have to find Sarah. Here she is, I think, I hope.
She's in Texas.
She's in Texas. Oh, okay, so there she is. Hi, Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us. And we've got questions coming up. Hang on, I've got questions. So Charlie, do you have tips for engaging younger volunteers and students, groups, and classes? And I'm thinking perhaps these are young elementary children, even preschool kids.
So you're thinking that having people work with, having like older kids work with younger kids? That's kind of, yeah, okay. Yeah, so a lot of it with kids is having the right tasks for their age group. So having the right tasks, so you're not asking a kid to try to do something that they're really not developmentally or ready to do or physically ready to do, but also something that's enough challenge to it that they get excited about. So I think when you're looking at teaming up high school kids with elementary kids or middle school kids with elementary school kids, it's nice to think of some of those tasks and skills that the middle school kids or the high school kids could really feel like they've mastered, like they'd be like, this is my thing, I know how to do this. So when they go and work with the little or younger kids, they can really come at it as a teacher kind of thing, as a real mentor, the big brother, big sister kind of experience. And as they're showing them how the younger kids how to do that, the younger kids are really going to kind of pick up on that confidence, that experience, and it creates that modeling that we really like to see, so that as those younger kids get older, they can start modeling it for the other kids. So think about the tasks and what's appropriate per the age group, and I know KidsGardening.org has a lot of resources for those kinds of tasks and matching them with the different age groups.
Excellent. Sarah, do you have anything to add there?
Sure.
And how early were your kids involved in their garden?
Oh, we started at about 2, getting them involved. As far as volunteers, pulling in volunteers, I know our group works with the local Interact Club at the high school. It's a group of kids that are already community organization minded. They have to get a certain number of hours in to be part of that club. So they make excellent volunteers. It's just making sure to contact them and schedule them because they're already interested, and they get in return, they're getting the credit. And actually at our local high school, the kids have to put in a certain amount of community service time to graduate. It's a graduation requirement. And so we can tap into that. It's just about finding the right teacher to help motivate them. As far as, we also have a lot of Boy Scouts in the area that are working on Eagle Scout projects, and a lot of them are willing to take on the garden as kind of adopt the garden and create a gazebo, or, you know, kind of they usually are involved in creating a larger structure. They raise the funds for their project which is great. Not only are they volunteering the time, they're also raising the money for the garden. So we've really tapped into the Boy Scouts and Eagle Scouts a number of times in our area. And the kids just love being able to be the expert. So that's another thing, you know, Charlie mentioned making sure to have them developmental, especially when you're working with junior high or high school students. Make sure you include that volunteer training so that they can feel like the experts, so that they know what they're doing. So that gives them a lot of confidence when they're working with the younger kids. So, but definitely tapping into so that they are also getting something in return. And colleges also, a lot of them have service organizations where they have required service hours. So if you can find the right contact there, it just works out great.
That's super. So I have a question for both of you, because you've both had experience in this, I'm sure. What do you do if you have one volunteer who wants to take over and not let others contribute significantly?
Oh,
or is that not a problem? Never a
difficult
problem.
volunteer. No, never a problem. Yeah, that is a bit of an issue. If you have someone who wants to take over or someone who knows it all, I've had that experience. Like, I know how to do that. I know how to do that. I don't need you to tell me how to do that. Or, you know, you're doing it the wrong way. You know, that kind of thing. It can be difficult, for sure, because what it does is not only it creates a dynamic with you and that volunteer, it creates an atmosphere for all the other volunteers, and it can really kind of sour other people from being involved, because this person is really just kind of a boss. You know, they're just bullying people around or whatever they're doing. So in that situation, you know, what I've done in those kind of situations is try to pull the person aside, maybe have a little conversation with them, try to figure out what it is they're really excited about in the garden, and maybe steer them to some specific tasks, some specific things. So for example, they might be really big and I know everything about soil and composting. So maybe that's the thing that you kind of put them in charge of. It's like, I'm the composting guy over there, or composting woman, and they're doing that kind of activity, and sometimes that can kind of filter their need to kind of be the expert and the boss for something and not really overflow into some of the other things that are going on in the garden, and it make for a better harmonious environment. But it is a touch and go kind of thing, you know, so you have to really kind of play it by ear, and always keep in mind the big picture of all the volunteers and the school garden and what's going to be the best thing to make this a successful program, and not necessarily the best thing just for this one person who's so dominating.
How about you, Sarah? Do you have any ideas there?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that's when Charlie was first talking about the importance of having a garden committee, because if you start out with the atmosphere that your garden is run by a committee and multiple people, it's easier to continue that way. And so it's one of those, you know, examples of you lay the foundation that way that it's helpful as you go forward. The second thing is, yes, I've definitely had this experience before. And, you know, you try discreetly to try and get other people involved. If that doesn't work, you know, I have had to turn to the principal to get them to talk with the volunteer. You want to be discreet. You don't want it to turn into gossip, but you don't want it to become a big deal. But, you know, there have been points where we've had volunteers that we've had to say, you can't do this anymore. You know, we've gotten to that point. And so you need to look to the administration to take that on, because, and it's hard because people are volunteering, you think you can't fire them because it's not a real job, but when it is keeping your program from moving forward or making it a bad experience for the kids and the other volunteers, sometimes you have to do it. So
yeah, you can fire them, actually.
Yes, you can.
Okay. So Sarah, I wanted to touch on something that Charlie had mentioned earlier about behind-the-scenes volunteer jobs, like if there were people who didn't work directly in the garden, perhaps, but were doing things behind the scenes. And I think you had one slide there. Can you give examples of some of those volunteer jobs that might be necessary, and what other jobs could we be considering to be able to put people to work related to the garden, but not necessarily in the garden?
Yeah, there's tons of them.
Oh, okay.
But like one of the big ones is to help with finding donations and fundraising, someone to go out and look what grants are available and create a schedule of grants available, putting signs together, putting something as simple as having someone to help clean up the tools at the end of the year, if you know, just kind of helping wrap up. So there's always there's always jobs to do. I'm trying to think what else has come up. Charlie might have some more examples.
Yeah,
just ideas, Charlie?
and just advertising things, so you're doing or organizing things like a harvest dinner that you might be putting together, or a planting day and getting word out, putting posters up, all those kinds of things. A lot of those are small, well, some of them are small, not a lot of them, but some of them are smaller jobs that someone could feel like, oh yeah, I could take those 20 posters and put them up around town, and that's easy, and they'll feel like they've accomplished something. Whereas some of the other bigger organizational ones, that might be better done as a kind of committee, so that no one person feels like they've got to make the menu, make the food, get all the place settings and everything together for the harvest dinner. But there's a lot of, like Sarah was saying, a lot of things behind the scenes that are going on that those directly involved with the school garden may not see, but it's really an important part of it being successful.
Very good. Would it be okay to approach area businesses to do a cleanup day? And who would we contact at the business? And what actually, maybe even to enlarge that question slightly, what role can area businesses play in the school garden?
Yeah, certainly you can contact area businesses. I think I gave that example during my presentation of contacting IBM, and they came in and did a whole thing, a whole building thing. It's not necessarily a cleanup day, but a lot of businesses, big and small, not just big corporations, but small ones, will do a community service day or two during the year, and they're always looking for groups to work with. And if you can find some of those companies out there and solicit them and tell them what's going on, try to get them a little excited about your program, they might come out and help you do cleanup in the fall, or help you do some harvesting, or help you build something that you need to be built. They'll often come in, and the whole group and that staff will provide that manpower sometimes that it would take forever and be really a drudgery to move all that compost on a 100-degree day, right, Sarah? But if you had but if you had a whole company of people doing that, then it's not so hard to do. You're not working as hard to do it. So the person to probably contact, depending on the size of the company, would be the HR person, human resources people. They would be the first people to contact, because they're the ones who are really doing the outreach into the community, really looking for things that they can give back to their local town and community. So start with them, and if you have a smaller company, then you might have to go right up to the person in charge, the president or someone of that nature, or the CEO, whoever it is. And it's always nice to start with that garden committee that Sarah was mentioning, and find out who knows who in your community, because communities are small places. So you might know somebody whose spouse works at a company that does this, and through that you can kind of get an in, so they maybe come to your school to help you with a project.
Sarah, have you had businesses assist you in your gardens?
We have had, when we've gotten grants before, we've had the corporations that helped provide the grants would come out usually for a planting day to help in that way. So they were connected to us by the fact that they gave us the grant money. So
cool. Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for about one more question. And Sarah, I wanted to ask, one of the big problems that seems to come up pretty often is the whole question of watering. And how can we make sure that our garden has enough water and our plants have enough water, but not overwater? And who kind of honchos that, especially during the summertime when school isn't in session? How do you deal with that?
Well, I'm located in Texas, and I will tell you that we had a lot of water this spring. And so as far as overwatering, I think one of the biggest keys is having good soil to start out with. I know that's not an exact water question, but that actually is a big factor in how well you can water. Is if your soil's good, it's well draining, then you have less chances of overwatering. So making sure your soil is prepared is the first step. For us, where we are located, we actually do not grow anything during the summer. It's just too hot. It's too hard to keep up with. And so we focus on crops that we can grow while the kids are in school and watch. And then we get everything cleaned up really well at the end of the year and do that. As far as, it's tough. You do need to have a point person to keep an eye on the watering, especially if someone needs to come in on weekends and take turns, signing up, sharing it, but have one contact person that kind of keeps an eye on it. So is from my experience, what works well.
Do you have the ability also, in Texas, are you normally planting in the fall?
Yes, fall's our best Best crop.
Fall's the best time, even.
Yes,
That's,
it is actually.
yeah, very interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, very good. This is the end of our Q&A session, our time, I'm afraid. But we can continue with additional questions on our Facebook page, and you can send them via email. You can send them any way you want to either Chartwells or to KidsGardening.org. We'll be happy to take care of those. And we hope to see you on our Facebook page. We want to thank you for watching today, and remember that we have the forum for the Eat, Learn, Live, and Grow program, and staff from both Kids Gardening and Chartwells will be hanging out there to answer questions and find out more of what you are doing and what you need to build your school garden program. Our next webinar, which is integrating the school garden with the classroom and the cafe, and I'm assuming the cafeteria, will be on September 22nd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime, we hope to have the conversation continue on Facebook. Thank you very much for attending today. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Charlie. And we'll see you all in a month. Thanks again.